every word said in court will be broadcasted, it will be analyzed, it will be weaponized. And let's be honest, Monique, we've seen this happen before. Look at the Marwan Barghouti trial, for instance. You had the terrorists turn the courtroom into a political stage. And the media didn't really cover the charges. What they covered was actually his boldness.
Welcome to Two Lawyers, Three Opinions. I'm Monique Beadle.
And I'm Uri Morad.
We're both lawyers with the Jerusalem Institute of Justice.
I'm an Israeli based in Jerusalem.
And I'm an American based in New York.
Our work takes us deep inside the United Nations, where we fight back against the double standards and demonization of the State of Israel.
Basically, we have front row seats to the madness.
And we are here to help you make sense of the legal battles Israel is facing, especially since October 7th.
Today, we're diving into one of the most emotionally charged, legally complex, and historically significant undertakings that Israel has ever attempted: the criminal prosecution of the October 7th terrorists, specifically members of Hamas's Elite Nukhba Unit.
Yes, and Nukhba are actually the men who carried out, among others, the massacre at Kibbutz Nir Oz. Now, 18 months later, Israel is getting ready to indict 22 of them. But of course, the full scope is even bigger. We could see hundreds of terrorists put on trial.
And it raises some huge questions. Is Israel's legal system built for a mega trial like this? Which court is going to hear this case? What happens if no lawyer wants to defend these terrorists? And critically, could the death penalty come into play?
And let's start with the basics. How the indictments came together, because these aren't just regular police files, I would say.
No, not even close. There's about 300 terrorists who were involved in the massacre that are now in Israeli custody. We have to remember that on October 7th, about 950 of them were killed inside of Israeli territory. That was by police, soldiers, civilians who were armed, first responders. But these 300 were either caught inside of Israel on October 7th, or they have been captured during the fighting in Gaza. And the Israeli government has been really clear that these men are not being traded in hostage deals. They're going on trial.
And this evidence, it's a battlefield evidence. Hard drives, phone records, internal Hamas documents as well, all seized during the combat in places like Khan Yunis and also in Rafah. And Shin Bet and the IDF intelligence then sifted through all those materials, trying to link each specific people, to specific crimes committed on October 7th. And it wasn't just digital. Investigators gathered something like 2,000 survivors' testimonies and around 400 testimonies from security forces as well. It's actually the biggest terror investigation Israel has ever handled.
We should mention that it's not just Israel doing the digging. The American government is investigating as well, and that's because 46 U.S. citizens were murdered on October 7th. Israeli prosecutors actually asked the U.S. recently to hold off on filing charges so that Israel could lead the legal response.
As it should, definitely. And that small detail actually says it all. The Israeli government knows perfectly well that this isn't just a legal battle. It's a political one as well.
From my perch, it feels like the stakes are massive because we're 18 months into this war and still not a single perpetrator has been brought to justice. Even the International Criminal Court in The Hague couldn't bring itself to charge a living Hamas leader. Instead, they charged a dead man, Mohammed Deif. So to me, this isn't just about punishing terrorists. It's also about preserving national dignity.
And this has the potential to be Israel's version of the Nuremberg trials. Not because of the size of this case, but rather because of the moral weight.
Okay, let's talk about how Israel might actually move forward with the trials, because the legal system doesn't seem built for something this big.
Yeah, so the first option is regular criminal trials in civilian courts. But that is very risky. The prosecutors would have to disclose sensitive intelligence to the defendants and the lawyers as well. Stuff too secret to show even to the judges themselves sometimes.
Don't Israeli courts have classified evidence procedures? I mean, or if we trust our system when it's inconvenient, we have to trust it when it's dangerous too.
I get that, but in Israel, opening the door, even a crack, can blow up the whole thing, the whole case. One bad ruling and these murderers could walk free. I personally cannot risk that.
But if the trial's too secretive, and if the outcome is basically predetermined, then Israel will lose credibility, and that's not justice either.
Which is why the second option matters, and that is a military trials. Different rules, different evidence standards, more protection for the classified materials.
Okay, but military courts can order the death penalty. That's something that almost never happens in civilian courts.
Exactly. But even there, it's complicated. Because Israel hasn't executed anyone since Adolf Eichmann, and that was back in 1962.
Oof, I'm of two minds about this. Before October 7th, I opposed the death penalty for so many reasons. In the American legal system, innocent people are still put on death row. It's not really clear whether it actually succeeds in deterring criminal behavior. And then there's the trauma for the prison guards who have to carry out the execution. But after what we saw on October 7th, families burned alive, children taken into captivity, elderly women mutilated in their beds, farm workers beheaded. You and I have handled some of the evidence ourselves, and we know the survivors by name. They're our clients, so how do we expect them to just accept a life sentence for this? I mean, if it was my family, I don't think I could.
I hear you. But the death penalty won't erase the horrors. And executing them could backfire, turning them into martyrs, songs, murals, a twisted legacy.
Yeah, they're always going to celebrate horror. But for many Israelis, the idea of keeping these men alive, feeding them, housing them, protecting their rights, it feels unbearable. And keeping them alive also opens the door to trading them in a future hostage deal, which just rewards the whole kidnapping enterprise. And it just continues this psychotic cycle.
And that is why it's a brutal dilemma indeed. There's a third option as well, and that is changing the laws. And as we speak, there are now 9 proposals, 9 different bills on the table, allowing video testimonies, withholding classified materials from the defense, and even having a trial without the defendants or even the lawyers physically present.
That sounds like a trial in absentia. That's definitely not kosher.
It would be a radical change, but many argue that it's justified by the radical nature of the crimes. They represent the fundamental shift in how Israel sees justice for acts of terrorism.
I think because I'm suddenly open to a death sentence, I'm now very invested in a good trial, because you can't have a legitimate death sentence without a legitimate trial. And the cornerstone of a good trial is access to good lawyers. So Israel's public defender's office has actually said that they won't represent these men. So who will?
Good question. The courts are scrambling to find private lawyers. One Arab law office has been doing that, but they haven't been paid. And they're now actually suing the state for nearly $1 million shekels. And the courts have repeatedly approached both the Justice Ministry and the public defense by, both of them constantly refusing to provide funding for that. So now the finance ministry is being asked to step in and to find a source for the payment of those law firms.
Okay, so everyone deserves a fair trial, even monsters. But I just can't help thinking, how will it be perceived when the state of Israel starts paying legal fees for terrorists before a single restitution case for survivors has paid out a judgment? I mean, it's a question of who should be paid first.
If Israel wants to be able to call itself a democracy, if we want this trial to mean something beyond just vengeance, we must find a way to do it right, even for them. Because it's not just their guilt on trial, it's our values, our identity, our resolve to pursue justice without becoming what we ourselves despise.
Okay, so let's talk about the stakes. What do we want this trial to achieve? A death sentence, closure for the survivors and the victims' families? Or is there something bigger at stake?
Listen, I think that this trial will help shaping what the world sees as right and wrong after October 7th. We are, in essence, putting together, I would say, the first comprehensive legal narrative of what really happened on that day. That matters deeply, not just for Israelis, but for the entire international community, that will inevitably try to reshape, and we see that already. They're trying to reshape the event through political filters. And the trials will be front page news all over the world. Every word said will be used, sometimes against us as well.
That's why I think the trial should be televised.
You're giving terrorists just a stage if you do that.
Sure, maybe, but if you hide the proceedings, then it looks like Israel has something to hide. If it's open proceedings, then there's a chance of controlling the narrative.
Monique, every word said in court will be broadcasted, it will be analyzed, it will be weaponized. And let's be honest, Monique, we've seen this happen before. Look at the Marwan Barghouti trial, for instance. You had the terrorists turn the courtroom into a political stage. And the media didn't really cover the charges. What they covered was actually his boldness.
So you're saying that Marwan Barghouti's profile as the, quote, Palestinian Nelson Mandela was forged by the international press, which was running a beat on his murder trial.
You cannot have an anti-Israeli hero without some Jewish blood on his hands. Think about the trial of Kozo Okamoto back in 1972. He was part of the Japanese Red Army, and he massacred 26 passengers at the Ben Gurion airport in Israel. His trial turned into a platform for his ideology, a bunch of political theater. Israel has to maintain a tight balance between due process on the one hand and suppressing propaganda on the other.
Yeah, but what about the platform for the survivors, for their voices, for their stories, for their truthful recollection of the darkest day in Israel's history? I'm thinking about the film that we made. Okay, guys, warning, I'm going to plug our film. We took the stories of 7 survivors of the October 7th massacre. We turned it into a 1-hour film, and we've been showing this on campuses and in communities across the globe. And no one, not one person who has watched this film has afterwards said, you know, I think the October 7th massacre was an understandable reaction to the Israeli occupation. I want people to watch the trailer. Go to jij.org. You can show this film in your local community. And I'll end my plug. But what about the platform for the survivors?
I think that if we don't show the victims, we let Hamas control the narrative. So the courtroom setup matters. Even the camera angles suddenly have a geopolitical significance, you know? The trial has to feel like justice instead of just vengeance. Right now, many of these terrorists are being held under Israel's incarceration of unlawful combatants law. This means their detention can be renewed repeatedly, actually, without a trial. That alone can be considered as controversial. And this is why we need to move to a trial, because it restores the legitimacy of the system itself.
I just can't resist comparing this to the Eichmann trial. His detention was also controversial. He was arrested in Argentina, and it was just controversial that that happened in the first place. And that trial shaped the way Israelis understood the Holocaust. This trial has the potential to define how Israeli society talks about terrorism, about Hamas, about the responsibilities of a democratic state under siege. That's why I think transparency is key. I mean, to redact documents for security purposes is fine, but to hide the process entirely, I think would be a mistake. I think we can't let this trial become something that only legal insiders understand. It needs to become part of our collective memory. Every Israeli child, every Jewish child should grow up knowing what happened on October 7th, not just because they watched an Uvda segment on Channel 12, but because there are court records, there is an archive, and yeah, there are perhaps some draconian sentences too.
And I want us, Monique, to talk a little bit about the charges. So far what we have is aiding the enemy in war, murder with special cruelty, murder of the helpless, torture and mutilation, and a new charge as well, and that is violating the sovereignty of the state. And this one in particular actually opens the door to a death penalty.
Well, let's unpack the reasoning on this one, violating the sovereignty of the state.
Yeah, so the Justice Ministry looked at the total collapse of control in the south of Israel on October 7th. The killings, the kidnappings, the towns that had to be evacuated, and decided that these acts weren't just terrorism. They were an assault on the very existence of the state of Israel.
One charge they haven't included yet is genocide. Adolf Eichmann was tried under Israel's genocide law. The Jerusalem Institute of Justice takes the position that Hamas committed genocide on October 7th. Can you help our listeners understand why we're willing to keep using this term, even after it's been weaponized by the South African government?
By the South African government, if I might add, as a proxy of the Palestinians, of course. Yeah, the October 7th massacre wasn't, simply an indiscriminate violence. It was an ideological motivated extermination. And the systematic nature of the attack, the selection of victims, the brutality, the deliberate choice of the most vulnerable, all of them points to something far more calculated. This wasn't just a chaos. It was intentional. And under international law, intention matters. When the goal is the destruction of a people, it can be in whole, it can be in part, because simply because who they are, that's the threshold. That is genocide.
I agree that it fits legally, but it's a political grenade. Charging genocide, it could make the international backlash even worse.
So what? Truth matters, Monique. Truth matters more than politics. We have to say that.
Maybe, or maybe fighting for the full truth means fighting smart, not just fighting loud.
Sometimes the truth is the fight, Monique, especially now.
So today you got 2 lawyers and definitely 3 opinions.
Maybe even 4, if you count the arguments I had myself on the way here.
We want to hear what you think. Should the Nukhba terrorists be charged with genocide? Should the trials be televised? Should the death penalty be on the table?
Please drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode, and don't forget to follow 2 Lawyers, 3 Opinions for more honest conversations about the law, justice, and Israel's future.
Until next time, we're signing off.